Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, wherever you are. It's a great pleasure to be a part of the online version of this year's Coastal Ocean Environment Summer School, which is going to be holding physically in Ghana. My name is Abdulwakil Saba from the Department of Fisheries, Lagos State University, and a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Biology, Faculty of Science, University Putra, Malaysia. The title of my presentation is Utilizing Traditional Ecological Knowledge for Ocean Sustainability. So during this presentation, we are going to be looking at the meaning and dimensions of traditional ecological knowledge, sources and importance of tech, its applications, challenges and opportunities, as well as the way forward. Indigenous people are well known as the custodians of some of the world's most biologically diverse territories, and their ecological knowledge are extremely invaluable for humanity. These people have had close interactions over generations with the environment, making it possible for them to help safeguard an estimated 80% of the world's biodiversity. Therefore, to fully understand the ocean in order to achieve sustainability, there is a need to explore the knowledge held by the indigenous people, albeit in a responsible manner. The ocean is extremely important, hosting about 10 million species that provide a wide range of ecosystem services, while more than 3 billion people depend on the resources for their subsistence. In fact, artisanal and small-scale commercial fisheries contribute to food security, economic growth, as well as job creation. Almost half of the oxygen we breathe in come from the oceans, while one-third of the carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the ocean as a way of helping to minimize the impact of carbon dioxide as a trigger for climate change. So it helps to sink carbon dioxide. More so, many coastal communities who live around these resources are intrinsically connected to them, making it a very important resource. So, what is ocean sustainability? Why ocean sustainability? Ocean sustainability is the approach employed to manage our oceans, not only our oceans, but also the benefits they provide. It also entails achieving sustainability across all the dimensions that revolve around it, including the economic, environmental, social, spiritual, and so on. It also entails promoting the existing as well as the new sectors around that. Ocean sustainability also involves emphasizing the benefits and making sure that the consequences that arise as a result of its exploitation or exploration are minimized. So the advantages are encouraged while the disadvantages are minimized as much as possible. So now we move to the Sustainable Development Goals and the ocean. We know that the ocean runs or flows through the 17 UN SDGs, either directly or indirectly, right from the first goal, which entails no poverty, till the last goal, which talks about partnerships for the goals. If we find out that the ocean revolves or is connected to each and every of these sustainable development goals, and this further emphasizes the importance of the ocean and the importance of achieving the sustainable development goals as they relate to the ocean. Next, we'll talk about the ways of knowing or ways of inquiry. In our world, we have adopted different means of understanding nature or of solving certain problems that arise. And one of two of the ways that are actually used, or two of the approaches that are employed, include the scientific approach as well as the indigenous or place-based approach. So these are the two ways of knowing, and they are both of them are extremely important in identifying the truths. None of them should overshadow the other. Although, what we have seen is that the scientific knowledge, which is more recent, is a kind of overshadowing the indigenous or place-based knowledge and relegating it to the backseat. And this is uncalled for. So, so we talk about tech, meaning of traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous knowledge or local ecological knowledge. These three terminologies are used interchangeably, and for the purpose of this presentation, I will be using them interchangeably. If I say tech, I'm also referring to indigenous knowledge or local ecological knowledge. So this is the knowledge that relies on relationship-based processes. The knowledge is a form of collaborative knowledge coming from people who are from a particular geographical area. It entails the feeling of responsibility for future generations. Its common principles include responsibility, respect, reciprocity, and connectivity to each other and to the environment. It also integrates different dimensions. Now we try to compare traditional ecological knowledge with modern science. What are their differences? Basically, traditional ecological knowledge relies more on oral tradition, while modern science bases its information on written tradition. Traditional ecological knowledge is holistic in its approach, while modern science is reductionist in its approach. When we talk about holistic approach, we refer to the emphasis on the interconnectivity or interconnection and interdependence of various elements within a system, and it considers the whole system as more than the sum of its parts, as opposed to the reductionist approach, which focuses on breaking down complex systems into smaller, simpler components to analyze them separately. The reductionist process or approach also seeks to understand the system by studying it individually or in isolation. So this is telling us more about the reductionist and the holistic approaches. Then also, traditional ecological knowledge stems from observation and experience, while modern science is taught and learned mostly analytically. For traditional ecological knowledge, environment is a part of the social and spiritual relationships, while in modern science is hierarchical and relies on compartmentalized organization. Finally, traditional ecological knowledge is based on cumulative and collective experience. while modern science is based on laws and theories. So, what are the dimensions of traditional ecological knowledge? Talking about the dimensions of traditional ecological knowledge towards achieving ocean sustainability, we look at three major dimensions for the purpose of this presentation. First is governance and management practices. The second is cosmology, which entails ethics and values of the indigenous people. And the third is data, how they carry out their observations of places, processes, and relations. So these are dimensions that are looked at holistically, just like it was mentioned earlier, that we look at the interrelationship or interconnection that occurs between and among the different parts as opposed to what is obtainable in modern science where focus is being beamed on a particular part which is studied extensively. So these are the dimensions of tech. So we move on to the sources of traditional ecological knowledge. What are the sources of traditional ecological knowledge? Traditional, the part of the sources include the indigenous and local communities, also the traditional fishermen, the coastal dwellers, as well as other stakeholders who have lived near the marine ecosystems for generations. So why is tech so important? Why are we talking about this? Why should we bother ourselves about traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous knowledge when there is a scientific way of also understanding our world or of finding solutions to our problems? It's important because indigenous communities have first-hand information. They are deeply connected with the ocean because they have relied on the oceanic resources for their sustenance as well as culture and identity over a long period of time. And this knowledge offers holistic perspectives, as mentioned earlier, on the ocean ecosystems, including biodiversity, ecological processes, and interconnections among all these. So this is why it is important. More, it also encompasses sustainable fishing practices, marine resource management, and traditional governance systems. The indigenous people bring very valuable information to knowledge pairing sections by way of direct year-round observation made by people over many generations. Now we look at the applicability of traditional ecological knowledge. Traditional ecological knowledge, just like we've emphasized its importance, is applicable to conservation biology in order to achieve sustainability of the oceanic resources. So it can be applied to folk systematics, population level knowledge can be gained, while and also ecological relationships can be understood using traditional ecological knowledge. So under folk systematics, we have phylogenetics, biogeography, and so on. Then we have behavioral ecology and population genetics under the population level knowledge. And finally, under the ecological relationships, we talk about community biology and ecosystem management. So what are some of the applications of tech we are going to be looking at in this in the course of this presentation? We are going to be focusing on three aspects. First one is ecosystem stewardship, marine resource management, and climate change adaptation and mitigation. For ecosystem stewardship, it is known that indigenous communities have a profound understanding of the local ecosystems as well as the dynamics, contributing to ecosystem-based management and enhancing resilience and promoting sustainable resource use. So the indigenous practices emphasize biodiversity, harmony, and balance in nature. Next is marine resource management. So indigenous communities have developed highly effective resource management strategies over the centuries. Some of the practices um, of these people is marine protected areas. They institutionalize marine protected areas. They impose seasonal fishing restrictions, customary rules that ensure sustainability and equitable access to the resources. Therefore, incorporating the traditional management systems into modern scientific approaches can enhance ocean sustainability. So I bring forth a case study of an indigenous community of people in Africa, precisely Kenya, around the Lake Victoria Basin as an example to illustrate how the indigenous people have been able to institutionalize resource management approaches that has worked for them over time. So the example is about the low fishers who live along the shores of Lake Victoria and have traditionally relied on fishing for a long period of time. These people have their own indigenous fishing techniques, preservation methods, as well as systems of management that ensured sustainable utilization of their resources. They had traditional and territorial rules and regulations that ensured sustainability. So this is a perfect example of how the indigenous people have been able to ensure sustainability through their own rules and regulations, which are well followed by the people. The third dimension we are going to be looking at is the third application, so to speak, is the application to climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. Indigenous knowledge helps in climate change adaptation and mitigation to reduce the impact on the ocean through these adaptation strategies. The knowledge identifies early warning signs and helps to predict changes that leads to the suggestion of adaptive measures, relevant adaptive measures that can help to prevent disasters. So the indigenous people, they have the knowledge that is needed for the global community to implement and scale up climate action. We can see this in some case studies. The first one is as regards the Philippines. There is a community of people known as the Tubigon, which is a municipality located in the west coast of Bohol. Here, we have about 45,000 households. We have about 45,000 people who are housed by the community. So there are a number of islands in this area. As a result, they are easily affected by the impact of climate change through flooding due to sea level rise and land subsidence. So the people actually suggested a mitigation approach which involved um, raising their floor above the high tide level and elevating their belongings in the houses and constructing stilt houses. So all these approaches were initiated by the indigenous people because they understood the dynamics of the impact of the climate change on their lives. So they were able to come up with simple but efficient methods to mitigate and adapt with the impact of sea level rise. And these were deemed to be extremely effective. So this is an example of the benefits of what indigenous knowledge as a way of finding solutions to problems. The second case study is that of the Alaskan region in the United States. Here, it was noted that the indigenous people, in terms of the hunters, the mariners, trappers, and so on of that region, had been noticing the signs of climate warming since the 1950s. They have seen changes in the ocean currents. They have seen changes in ice conditions and snowfall, as well as in the colonization of their peninsula by certain trees and shrubs. As a result, they had issued some warnings. However, their warnings found few listeners outside of their region. Not until recently, when the rest of the world now took notice of the severe impact of the change that was occurring. So their warnings were ignored initially, but later it was clear that they actually knew what they were saying. And this is also emphasizing the importance of their knowledge and why the knowledge should be taken seriously. So next we talk about the indigenous rights and ocean governance. So we know that we have every human being has its own rights. So also the indigenous people have certain rights that are sacrosanct, that should not be toyed with in dealing with them. So therefore, respecting and recognizing their rights is crucial for inclusive ocean governance because their knowledge can inform policies, decision-making processes, and conservation initiatives. More so, collaboration and partnership with these indigenous communities can ensure equitable and sustainable management of the resources. Because what we have seen is that um, their rights have been usurped in some instances. A case study to emphasize this can be seen in the indigenous people and salmon in Alaska, United States. These people have been closely knitted with their environment and salmon for at least 12,000 years. And the salmon has been a central importance in their way of life, contributing to their well-being. Unfortunately, there have been pronounced inequities which have threatened their relationship and their stewardship systems. This happened through commodification and marketization of commercial fishing rights, which was ordinarily available to them in the past, easily available to them in the past. So this particular situation has dispossessed them from their human and cultural rights to fishing ways of life, leading to many indigenous youths struggling to gain access to fishing livelihoods, leaving many of them in precarious states. Now we look at the challenges. We have mentioned a number of challenges um, facing the indigenous knowledge and the holders of this knowledge. But basically, all these issues actually challenges the local ecological knowledge and the benefits that could be gained from them via loss of traditional knowledge due to colonization, marginalization, and modernization. It also leads to trauma in research relationship whereby there is a conflict between the researchers, scientific researchers, and the indigenous people. And finally, it also leads to what loss of access rights, just like what um, I mentioned just now from the US example in Alaska. So talking about trauma in the research relationship, it has been established that indigenous knowledge and property has been misused, decontextualized, and even stolen by researchers who act purely as outsiders and show up only to collect information and leave without any clear benefit to the communities or geographical areas they have come to study. Also, Cochrane et al. 2008 noted that research has been a source of distress for the indigenous communities because of the inappropriate methods and practices adopted by the researchers. Simons and Christopher 2019 emphasized that the analytical aspects of Western scientific research can be dehumanizing to the indigenous ways and can appear to be an attack on their knowledge, tradition, and stories. An example to illustrate the conflict or trauma existing between scientific research and indigenous knowledge and the knowledge holders. We have the example of the Monarchy, a sheet volcano in Hawaii, United States, where a leading astronomy group led by the University of Hawaii were working to build a $2 billion observatory known as the 30-meter telescope at the peak of that volcano, shield volcano, which already hosts about 12 other telescopes. But this move was opposed by the native Hawaiians, who regard the site as sacred, and they described the cultural significance and their long-standing ties to the land. Unfortunately, the indigenous people were portrayed as interlopers on their land, despite having been the custodians of these lands for centuries and developing their own technologies and knowledge systems for understanding space. More often than not, scientists cause unintended harm to the indigenous people as well as their resources. This is a Nature article that emphasized the fact that the controversy which happened between the scientists and the indigenous people is forcing scientists to grapple with how their research affects indigenous people. And this is a reality that must be taken care of. Scientists must look at and understand and factor in the importance of their activities and how they affect positively or negatively the indigenous communities hosting them. What are the opportunities that abound from this whole story of indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge, and how they can interact? So the first thing is to revitalize indigenous knowledge through intergenerational knowledge transfer, capacity building, and inclusive partnerships. There should be better recognition. Through better recognition and respect, we can enhance the benefits obtainable from the knowledge of the indigenous people. More so, in the recent time, there is funding for research that include indigenous knowledge into ocean and coastal-based decision making. Here is an example of a call for proposals, for funding of proposals which seek to include indigenous knowledge in ocean and coastal evidence-based decision making. This call was made by the Learn First Ocean program located in the United States. And this particular call has a deadline of October 16th, October 2023. So this shows that whoever is interested in approaching or submitting a proposal that has to do with the inclusion of indigenous knowledge in ocean and coastal evidence-based decision making can do well to check more about this information and probably apply. So what is the way forward? We have identified the opportunities. What's the way forward? So it has been recommended that all academic researchers should imbibe honesty, transparency, and the intention to give back so as to build ethical relationships with indigenous communities. Another important thing to do is to institutionalize the process of ethical approval for intended research activities at places belonging to the indigenous communities in order to ensure best practices. Indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge should be incorporated into marine research policy, development, and management plans. Collaboration should be fostered between indigenous communities, scientists, policymakers, and stakeholders. Indigenous-led initiatives should be supported. Their rights and self-determination in ocean governance should never be downplayed. More so, there should be what indigenous-based sustainable fisheries certification for local fishermen, people who intend to explore or exploit the resources around the indigenous um, area areas. Then countries that are categorized as underdeveloped and developing need to harness the benefit of indigenous knowledge for sustaining their ocean ecosystem. For example, Africa is bereft of scientific information regarding the ocean because of lack of sophisticated equipment which can help to observe and understand the ocean. So while we grapple with this problem of coming up with necessary equipment that could help that could help us to understand our oceans better, we have the indigenous knowledge to benefit from in order to serve as a first-hand information until it is possible to scientifically verify and further understand the dynamics around our marine ecosystems. Before I close, I'm going to talk about the two concept of two-eyed seeing, and this concept was actually envisaged by elder Dr. Albert Marshall, is an environmentalist, who stated that the two-eyed seeing embraces the act of learning to see from one eye with the strength of indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strength of mainstream knowledges and ways of knowing, and to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. So it's not about one particular knowledge type overshadowing the other, but both particular knowledge types or ways of knowing working together to benefit in all ramifications. So although direct observations may have limited experimental control, but they provide high ecological validity, especially for visible climate change effects. Therefore, observers excel in capturing detail and they succeed in interpreting anomalies. In conclusion, indigenous knowledge hold immense value for sustainable ocean management, and by recognizing, respecting, and incorporating indigenous perspectives, we can forge a path towards a resilient and thriving ocean. Let us embrace indigenous knowledge as we work together for the future of our oceans and the people that rely on them. Thank you for listening. So we open for questions. Thank you.